The enormous human vessel Horizon drifted slowly into orbit around the pale green planet. Inside the command center, Lieutenant Commander Han stood watching the view screen, her dark eyes fixed on the approaching Talon ships. They looked like golden teardrops against the green backdrop of their world. "They're beautiful," whispered Officer Lee, standing beside her. Han nodded. "And completely alien. Remember your training. No sudden movements, no showing teeth during expressions." After months of long-distance communication, this would be their first face-to-face meeting with the Talons. The diplomatic team had studied what little they knew about these insectoid aliens, but much remained unknown. The communication panel chimed. "Talon vessel requesting docking permission," said the systems operator. "Granted," Han ordered, straightening her uniform. "Let's make history." The docking procedure took nearly an hour. Human engineers marveled at the organic-looking Talon technology that seemed to grow and adapt rather than connect mechanically to their ship. Han led her team to the meeting chamber. They had prepared it according to the specifications sent by the Talons: lower gravity, higher temperature, and a specific mixture of gases that wouldn't harm humans, but would make the visitors more comfortable. The chamber doors slid open. Han felt her heart beat faster as the Talons entered. They were tall, nearly 7 feet, with iridescent exoskeletons that caught the light like prisms. Their bodies were slender, with 4 arms and 2 legs, and their faces featured large compound eyes that reflected the room in hundreds of tiny images. The lead Talon stepped forward. Its voice came through the translator, sounding musical and strange. "I am Sul, Chief Diplomat of the Talon Collective. We greet the humans of Earth with peaceful intent." Han bowed slightly. "I am Lieutenant Commander Han of Earth's exploratory fleet. We are honored to meet you and hope for friendship between our peoples." The first hour passed in formal introductions and presentations. Humans showed images of Earth, explained their government structure, and described their expansion into space. The Talons shared information about their homeworld and their society. During a break, Han noticed one of the Talons, smaller than the others with lighter coloring, watching Dr. Song drink water. "You consume liquid frequently," the Talon observed. Dr. Song smiled, remembering not to show his teeth. "Yes, humans need regular hydration." "Fascinating. We require hydration once every 14 cycles." Dr. Song blinked in surprise. 14 days. "Your days, yes," the Talon confirmed. "I am Mick, biology specialist. Your species intrigues me." This began an exchange of biological information that revealed just how different they were. The Talons didn't sleep daily, but entered short trance states. They processed food slowly over weeks. Their crystalline exoskeletons stored energy from their sun. Later, the full diplomatic teams reconvened for a shared meal. The humans had prepared special synthesized food safe for Talon consumption, while the Talons brought traditional welcome offerings. Officer Lee carefully tried a crystal-like substance offered by Sul. His eyes widened. "It tastes like memories of sunshine," he said in wonder. Sul's head tilted. "An apt description. It stores the energy of our sun and releases it when consumed." As the meal continued, Han noticed the Talons watching with fascination as the humans ate multiple items. "Your energy requirements seem continuous," Sul commented. "Do you not store nutrients?" "We store some fat reserves," Han explained, "but we need regular intake." "How do you accomplish long journeys?" another Talon asked. "We bring food and water with us," Dr. Song said, "and we grow some aboard our ships." The Talons exchanged looks that Han couldn't interpret. "Your species maintains consciousness continuously?" Mick asked. "We sleep daily, for about 8 hours," Han replied. "Every single day." Sul seemed shocked. "How inefficient." Han smiled. "We've managed well enough to reach your world." Later, as they discussed potential trade agreements, one of the Talons suddenly froze. Its exoskeleton changed color slightly, becoming more vibrant. The other Talons immediately moved away, creating a small circle of space around it. "Is something wrong?" Han asked, concerned. Sol gestured for calm. "Lur is simply processing. This sometimes happens during complex thought. It will pass momentarily." True enough, after about 30 seconds, the Talon called Lur resumed movement, its color returning to normal. "Forgive the interruption," Lur said. "I was calculating resource exchange potentials and required a processing moment." The humans were fascinated. Dr. Song leaned toward Han and whispered, "Their brains work differently. They seem to need to stop completely to process complex information." The meeting continued for several more hours. Han noticed the Talons becoming increasingly still, their movements slowing. "Perhaps we should continue tomorrow," she suggested. "We've covered much ground today." Sol's compound eyes reflected Han in hundreds of tiny images. "You are not tired. Humans can negotiate for this length of time without rest." Han was surprised by the question. "We're fine, but we're happy to adjourn if you prefer." "Most interesting," Sol said. "We require a rest cycle now. Our processing capabilities diminish after 8 hours of complex interaction." As arrangements were made for the Talons to return to their ship, Mick approached Han privately. "Your species' endurance intrigues me," Mick said. "Would you permit further study of human biology during our exchange?" Han nodded. "We're equally curious about yours. Dr. Song would be pleased to collaborate with you." Mick's upper limbs moved in what Han guessed was a gesture of agreement. "Tomorrow we will show you our world. I believe both our species will learn much from each other." As the Talons departed, Han gazed out at the green planet below. First contact had gone well, but she sensed they had only begun to understand the profound differences between their species. What other surprises awaited them? How would these differences shape their relationship? This was just the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure. 3 months after first contact, Dr. Park stood on the balcony of the human embassy on the Talon homeworld. The sprawling crystal city glowed with internal light as the planet's twin moons rose above the horizon. He breathed the slightly sweet air through his filter mask, still adjusting to the higher oxygen content. "The night cycle begins," said a melodic voice behind him. "Yet you do not prepare for rest." Park turned to see Rill, his Talon guide, and now friend, standing in the doorway. Rill's exoskeleton caught the moonlight, creating tiny rainbows across the balcony floor. "Humans are actually quite active at night sometimes," Park explained. "Many of us enjoy the evening hours." Rill moved to stand beside him, joints clicking softly. "Your species continues to surprise me. So much activity, so little rest." Over the past weeks, Park had been documenting Talon biology and culture, while Rill did the same for humans. They had developed an easy rapport despite their differences. "I have a question," Rill said, compound eyes reflecting Park's image. "Your colleague Min mentioned she has offspring on Earth, 3 small humans." "Yes, she has 3 children," Park confirmed. "Yet she remains here, working. How is this possible?" Park looked confused. Why wouldn't it be possible? Rill's upper limbs made a gesture Park had learned meant surprise. "After reproduction, one must hibernate. This is universal." Park laughed softly. "Not for humans. We don't hibernate at all, especially not after having children." Rill went completely still, the Talon equivalent of shock. "You don't hibernate after mating?" "No. Human women carry babies for 9 months, give birth, and usually return to work within months." "This cannot be." Rill's voice rose slightly. "All intelligent life requires recovery hibernation after reproduction. The energy expenditure is too great otherwise." Park realized they had stumbled upon a profound biological difference. Talons hibernate after reproduction. Of course, after mating and egg-laying, a 3-month hibernation is necessary. Both partners must recover their energy. This is why family units include at least 6 adults, to care for existing offspring while mating pairs hibernate. Park nodded slowly. That explains the living arrangements I've observed. For humans, two parents typically raise children, though extended family often helps. And these parents, they mate and remain active. Rill's exoskeleton changed to a deeper hue, which Park recognized as their equivalent of embarrassment. Yes, humans don't physically need to rest after reproduction. Rill processed this information silently for nearly a minute. This explains much about your species' rapid expansion. Your continuous activity patterns give you advantages we do not possess. The next morning, Park received an urgent message from Captain Bai, the mission commander. "We have a situation," Boss said when Park arrived at her office. "The Talons have canceled all diplomatic meetings for the next 3 months with any married human couples." "What? Why would they?" Park stopped, suddenly understanding. "Oh no. Explain," Bai demanded. "There's been a misunderstanding. Talons believe married couples must hibernate after mating. They're trying to be respectful by not scheduling meetings." Boss sighed heavily. "So they think our married diplomats should be unconscious right now." "Essentially, yes. Fix this, Park. Quickly." Park found Rill in the Cultural Exchange Center, organizing specimens. "We need to talk about human and Talon differences regarding reproduction," Park said. "I have already informed the Cultural Ministry about your species' unusual patterns," Rill responded. "Accommodations have been made." "Those accommodations have canceled 3 months of vital meetings," Park explained. "Humans don't hibernate at all, and our reproduction doesn't require recovery periods like yours." Rill's antennae twitched, but Minister Sol observed Colonel Choi and Dr. Jun engaged in mating behaviors last week. Park felt his face grow hot. "What? How did?" "They touched faces in the garden. This is the first stage of Talon mating." Park struggled not to laugh. "They were kissing. That's affection, not necessarily mating. But they are pair-bonded, correct? Married, yes, but human mating and affection aren't the same as for Talons." Later that day, Park sat with the diplomatic team explaining the biological misunderstanding to the Talon Cultural Ministry. Minister Sol seemed deeply confused. "If you do not hibernate after mating, when do you restore your energy reserves?" Colonel Choi cleared her throat. "We sleep daily, as we explained before. That's sufficient. And mating does not deplete your energy significantly?" Another Talon asked. "Not to the point of requiring hibernation," Dr. Jun said, avoiding eye contact with his wife. Sol's exoskeleton shifted colors rapidly. "This is remarkable. Your species' stamina exceeds anything in our records." After the meeting, Rill approached Park privately. "I must apologize for the misunderstanding." "No need. These differences are why cultural exchange is important." Rill hesitated. "May I ask a personal question?" "Of course." "Human pair bonds mate repeatedly without hibernation cycles." Park nodded. "Yes, throughout their relationships. And reproduction itself. The female carries the offspring internally for 9 months while remaining conscious and active." "Yes." Rill went completely still again. "This defies biological principles as we understand them, the energy requirements alone." "Different evolutionary paths," Park suggested. That evening, Park received an invitation to observe a Talon cultural ceremony. When he arrived at the location, he found a large chamber filled with Talons standing in concentric circles. In the center, 2 Talons with brilliantly colored exoskeletons performed a complex dance, their movements synchronized perfectly. Rill whispered, "They announced their intention to mate. After the ceremony, they will retreat to hibernation chambers for 3 months." "What happens to their work responsibilities?" Park asked. "Others in their family unit assume their duties," Rill explained. "This is why we form 6-member units. 2 can always be in hibernation, while 4 maintain functions." Park watched the beautiful ceremony with new understanding. The Talons' reproductive cycle shaped their entire civilization, their architecture, their family structures, their work patterns. As they left the ceremony, Rill said, "The elders are fascinated by human endurance. They wish to understand how your species maintains such continuous activity." Park smiled. "And we're equally fascinated by your hibernation cycles. This is what makes first contact so valuable, discovering different ways of being." "Indeed," Rill agreed, "though I still cannot imagine remaining conscious after mating. The very thought exhausts me." They both laughed, the sound of human and Talon amusement blending strangely in the crystal hallway, different but somehow harmonious. The emergency alert sounded throughout the human embassy at midnight. Chief Medical Officer Gil jolted awake and grabbed his communicator. "What's happening?" he asked, voice still rough with sleep. "Sir, we have an urgent message from the Talon High Council," replied the night officer. "Some kind of medical emergency on their outer moon colony." Gil dressed quickly and hurried to the embassy's conference room. Captain Ba was already there, along with Dr. Park and several other staff members. On the large screen, 3 Talon Council members waited, their exoskeletons shifting between dark colors that indicated distress. "We apologize for the late hour," began Supreme Elder Nam. "A serious illness has broken out among our miners on Helion Moon. 23 colonists are affected, with symptoms progressing rapidly." "What kind of symptoms?" Gil asked, immediately alert. "Crystal degradation of the exoskeleton, followed by neural disruption," replied the Talon. 7 have already reached critical stage. Gil exchanged glances with his team. "Do you know the cause?" "We believe it may be a reaction to a newly exposed mineral layer. Our medical team is reviewing data, but—" The elder paused. "But what?" Captain Ba prompted. "The situation is complicated by reproductive timing. 80% of our medical specialists entered hibernation cycles last week. The remaining doctors are overwhelmed." Gil understood immediately. With most Talon medical staff in their mandatory 3-month hibernation after mating, the colony faced a crisis. "Can you wake some of your specialists?" Dr. Park asked. The third elder's exoskeleton paled. "Premature awakening causes severe neural damage. We would risk their lives." Captain Ba straightened her shoulders. "We offer our medical team to assist." The elder's antennae quivered, a sign of both relief and concern. "The environment on Helion is challenging for humans. High radiation, toxic atmosphere. We've worked in harsh conditions before," Jill said confidently. "We can use protective gear." 6 hours later, Jill led a team of 5 medical specialists aboard a Talon transport ship. The journey to Helion Moon took 3 hours, the fastest Gil had ever traveled through space. Through the viewport, the moon looked like a cracked yellow egg against black space. "Beautiful, in a deadly way," remarked Dr. One, the team's pathologist. Toll, their Talon pilot, swiveled his large head. "Helion is rich in rare minerals. The colony processes elements used in our technology." The ship landed on a flat plain near a cluster of dome-shaped structures. Gil and his team put on their environmental suits, heavy protective gear with enhanced radiation shielding that Dr. Park had helped design based on his knowledge of Talon environments. Inside the colony's medical center, the situation was worse than reported. 30 Talons now showed symptoms, their normally gleaming exoskeletons turning dull and brittle. The few conscious patients made clicking sounds of pain. "Our medical director entered hibernation 3 days ago," explained Locke, a junior Talon doctor who looked exhausted. "I have been working alone since the outbreak began." Gil immediately organized his team. Dr. Kang, set up the portable lab. Dr. One, begin tissue analysis. Dr. Yun, help me examine patients. The humans worked efficiently despite the cumbersome suits and the higher gravity of the moon. Gil noticed Locke watching them with his compound eyes reflecting amazement. "You move continuously," the Talon observed. "Don't you require rest cycles?" "We'll rest when necessary," Gil replied, already examining a patient. "How long have the symptoms been progressing?" "Approximately 70 hours. I must enter a processing trance soon or my functions will deteriorate." Gil nodded. Go rest. We'll handle things for now. As Locke left to recover, Jill turned to Dr. One. Any progress on identifying the pathogen? It's not biological, One replied, looking up from her microscope. It appears to be a mineral toxin that disrupts their crystal matrix. Their exoskeletons are literally dissolving. For the next 20 hours, the human team worked without breaks except for quick meals and bathroom visits. They identified the toxin as a compound released during mining operations, harmless to humans but devastating to Talon physiology. Gil developed a treatment that could halt the crystal degradation, while Dr. Kang synthesized a binding agent to flush the toxin from Talon systems. They moved from patient to patient, administering treatment and monitoring results. When Locke returned from his 8-hour trance, he found the humans still working. You have not entered rest cycles, he asked, astonished. No time, Dr. Yun said simply, adjusting an IV line for a patient. By the 36th hour, the first treated patients showed signs of improvement. Their exoskeletons began to regain luster, and pain levels decreased. But new cases continued to arrive as more miners fell ill. Gil's team worked in shifts now, 2 resting while 3 continued treatment. Locke watched in wonder as the humans pushed through fatigue, remaining functional far longer than any Talon could. At hour 50, a communication arrived from the Talon High Council. The Supreme Elder's image appeared on the medical center screen. We have received your treatment protocol, the Elder said. Remarkable work. We are synthesizing more medication and sending additional support. Gil nodded, too tired for formalities. The patients are stabilizing, but we need environmental engineers to fix the mining filtration system. They are on their way. But Doctor, the Elder paused. Our observers report that your team has been active for over 50 hours. Is this normal for humans? Jill managed a tired smile. Not normal, but possible when necessary. The Elder's antennae trembled. We had not fully understood human endurance until now. By hour 72, the crisis was under control. All patients were stable, and a Talon engineering team had modified the mining equipment to neutralize the toxic compound. As Gil's team finally prepared to return to the main planet, Locke approached them. The Talon medical officer's exoskeleton gleamed with a color Gil hadn't seen before, a deep blue that seemed to pulse with light. This color represents profound respect, Locke explained, noticing Gil's curious look. Your team has worked continuously for 3 days. No Talon could maintain consciousness and function for so long. Gil shrugged. Human stamina. We evolved as persistence hunters on Earth. Ba sighed. We've unintentionally started a cultural revolution. The next morning, Jun was surprised to find Lil waiting outside the embassy. I must speak with you, the young Talon said, exoskeleton shifting between nervous colors. Many of us have been meeting secretly. We believe hibernation cycles have limited our civilization's growth. Jun invited Lil inside but felt uncomfortable. I can't take sides in a Talon cultural matter. We're not asking you to, Lil replied. But we need scientific information about how humans maintain activity without hibernation. Jun hesitated. The council has asked me to limit such discussions. Because they fear change. Lil's antennae drooped slightly. For generations, we accepted that hibernation was biologically necessary. Now we know other paths are possible. Before Jun could respond, Dr. Park entered the room. Seeing Lil, he paused. I'm sorry, am I interrupting? No, Jun said, relieved. Dr. Park is our xenobiologist. He might have insights on this topic. Park listened as Lil explained the growing movement among younger Talons. His face showed both concern and interest. Biological imperatives and cultural practices are deeply intertwined, Park said carefully. Humans evolved without hibernation cycles, but that doesn't mean Talons can simply abandon yours. We understand the risks, Lil insisted. But some of us have already begun experiments with shortened processing trances. Tack has reduced his from 8 hours to 5 with no ill effects. Jun and Park exchanged concerned glances. Self-experimentation could be dangerous, Park warned. Perhaps, Lil admitted, but isn't that how science progresses? That afternoon, news spread through the city that a group of young Talons had publicly declared their intention to remain active during traditionally scheduled hibernation periods. Elder Cole immediately called for sanctions against the rebels. By evening, the central plaza had filled with Talons of all ages, some supporting the young reformers, others defending tradition. Their exoskeletons displayed a rainbow of emotional colors, and the air filled with clicking sounds of agitated debate. Captain Ba called an emergency meeting of the human diplomatic team. "We've inadvertently triggered a cultural shift," she said. "The council has requested that we distance ourselves from the situation." "That seems impossible now," Jun pointed out. "Our very presence represents an alternative to their biological assumptions." Dr. Park nodded. "We can't pretend human endurance doesn't exist, but we can help frame this as evolution rather than revolution." The next day, Park requested a meeting with both Elder Cole and the leaders of the Young Talon movement. To everyone's surprise, both parties agreed. In the Grand Chamber, with Jun translating, Park addressed the gathered Talons. "Different species evolve different solutions to survival," he began. "Humans developed endurance because of our environment. Talons developed hibernation cycles because of yours. Neither is superior, just different." He paused, looking at the young Talons. "Change should come through careful research, not rebellion." Then to Elder Cole, "And new knowledge shouldn't be suppressed, but integrated thoughtfully." After hours of tense discussion, a compromise emerged. The council would establish a research institute to study Talon biology and possible modifications to hibernation cycles. Young Talons would stop unauthorized experimentation and work within the new scientific framework. As the meeting concluded, Jun noticed Elder Cole approaching him. "Your species has brought great disruption," the elder said, "but perhaps also opportunity. For millennia, we accepted our limitations as unchangeable reality. Sometimes an outside perspective helps us see ourselves differently," Jun suggested. Indeed, Elder Cole's exoskeleton shifted to a thoughtful blue-green. "Perhaps both our species will continue to evolve through this exchange." Walking back to the embassy under the light of twin moons, Jun reflected on how something as simple as human stamina could transform an alien civilization's understanding of what was possible, not through force or intent, but simply by existing as an alternative. 1 year after the cultural upheaval began, Dr. Min stood in the gleaming laboratory of the new Joint Species Research Center. Talon and human scientists worked side by side, their movements creating an unusual rhythm. Humans steady and continuous, Talons in bursts of intense activity followed by stillness. "It is ready for testing," announced Pak, the lead Talon biologist. His exoskeleton glowed with a pale blue light of cautious optimism. Min approached the transparent container where a clear, gel-like substance swirled with tiny golden particles. "This is the final formula." "Yes," Pak confirmed, "based on human cellular regeneration patterns but modified for Talon physiology." For the past year, the research team had been developing a compound that might allow Talons to reduce their hibernation periods without harmful effects. The project had grown from the cultural revolution sparked by human presence. "Have the volunteers arrived?" Min asked. Pak's antennae twitched in affirmation. "They wait in the preparation chamber. 10 mated pairs who have agreed to test the modified hibernation cycle." The volunteers were young Talons who had just completed their mating rituals and would normally enter a 3-month hibernation. With the new treatment, researchers hoped to reduce this to just 1 month. Min followed Pak to the large chamber where the volunteers waited. Their exoskeletons displayed a mix of colors: excitement, nervousness, hope. Among them stood a familiar figure. "Lil," Min said with surprise. "I didn't know you were participating." The young Talon scientist's exoskeleton shifted to a pleased pink. "My mate, and I believe in this research. We wish to contribute. Min felt a surge of responsibility. These Talons were risking their health based on research she had helped develop. The treatment involves two components, Pack explained to the volunteers. First, the hibernation enhancer that will deepen your rest state, allowing faster neural recovery. Second, the metabolic stabilizer that will prevent crystal degradation during the shortened cycle. One by one, the mated pairs received the treatment. Technicians carefully monitored their vital signs as they entered hibernation chambers, crystal pods that hummed with soft blue light. Now we wait, Pack said. If successful, they will begin awakening in 30 days instead of 90. Over the next month, Min divided her time between monitoring the hibernation experiment and working on other joint research projects. The human-Talon collaboration had expanded beyond biology to include engineering, agriculture, and space exploration. On the 28th day, alarms sounded throughout the research center. Min rushed to the hibernation chamber to find Pack and other Talon scientists gathered around the monitoring station. "What's happening?" she asked anxiously. "Activity patterns are changing," Pack explained, his exoskeleton pulsing with excitement. "They are beginning to awaken, slightly ahead of schedule." 2 days later, Min watched as the first hibernation pod opened with a soft hiss. Lil emerged, her exoskeleton gleaming with unprecedented brightness. Sensors monitored her neural activity as she moved carefully, testing her limbs. "How do you feel?" Pack asked. "Complete," Lil replied, her voice clear and strong. "Refreshed. As though I had a full hibernation cycle." Over the next few hours, all 20 volunteers awakened successfully. Medical scans showed their systems functioning at optimal levels, despite the drastically shortened hibernation period. "We have done it," Pack declared, his exoskeleton shifting through colors of joy and pride. News of the breakthrough spread quickly. The High Council called an emergency session to review the results. Min and Pack presented their findings to the assembled elders, whose reactions ranged from amazement to cautious concern. "This changes everything," declared Elder Tool, whose progressive views had gained influence over the past year. "Our civilization has been shaped by hibernation cycles since our earliest history. With this modification, we can remain active nearly continuously." "We must proceed with caution," warned Elder Cole, though his exoskeleton showed less resistance than before. "Change must come gradually to avoid social disruption." The council approved expanded testing of the treatment, along with careful study of its long-term effects and social impacts. 6 months later, Min stood on the observation deck of the space station orbiting between the Talon homeworld and its moons. Captain Ba joined her, looking out at the spectacular view. "The first joint mining operation is exceeding expectations," Ba said. "With Talons now able to work with fewer hibernation breaks, productivity has increased by 60%. Min nodded. "And the new cultural exchange programs are flourishing. Humans learning Talon crystal crafting, Talons studying human endurance training." "Did you ever imagine the simple biological difference would lead to all this?" Ba asked. Min smiled. "Sometimes the most profound discoveries come from the most basic questions." Below them on the main deck, a ceremony was about to begin. Diplomats from both species gathered as Elder Tool and the human ambassador prepared to sign a historic treaty, the Galactic Biodiversity Accord, recognizing the value of biological differences as the foundation for cooperation. As Min watched the proceedings, she felt a presence beside her. Rill, now appointed as the first Talon ambassador to Earth, joined her at the viewport. "I remember when you first arrived," Rill said, exoskeleton glowing with nostalgic amber. "How shocked I was to learn humans don't hibernate after mating." Min laughed. "And I remember how surprised I was to learn Talons do." "Our differences frightened us at first," Rill observed. "Now they strengthen us." Below them, the treaty was signed to applause from both species. The document acknowledged that evolutionary diversity created unique strengths and perspectives that, when combined, achieved more than either species could alone. As part of the ceremony, Lil and her mate stepped forward. They had become symbols of the new Talon generation, maintaining respect for tradition while embracing change. They presented a crystal sculpture that captured both human and Talon DNA structures, intertwined in a double helix that spiraled upward. Different paths, shared future, Lil announced. Later that evening, a celebration brought together humans and Talons in the station's grand hall. Some Talons demonstrated their ability to remain active for human-like periods, while humans showed respect by observing short processing trances. Min found herself standing with Dr. Park, watching the harmonious interaction. "Remember when we worried we caused a revolution?" Park asked. Min nodded. "Instead, we helped spark an evolution. Both our species are changing, not to become like each other, but to learn from each other." "And to think," Park said with a smile, "it all started with a simple question about hibernation." "The best discoveries often begin with curiosity about the most basic things," Min replied, watching as humans and Talons danced together under the stars. Different rhythms, somehow creating a beautiful new harmony.